Good morning. It is good to see each of you here this morning. This morning's lesson is from the very small book in the Old Testament called Haggai. And just to put a little context in it, Haggai lived during the time that the captive Jews were returning back to Jerusalem. Remember, the Babylonians had taken the northern kingdom. Eventually they came down to the southern kingdom. They took them into captivity. And then while they were there was a turnover of power. And eventually the Persians come to power. And Haggai lived in the Persian period. Remember in the book of Daniel, King Darius? So that was Haggai's contemporary at the time. And so he lived during the time when people were actually coming back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city. And Haggai noted as a prophet of God that the people are more focused in on what they wanted than what God wanted. And so even though they began working on the temple, but for 18 years they stopped working on the temple. They're working on their own homes. In fact, in Haggai, God talked about them living in their paneled houses. And so they were so focused in on what they wanted and not on what God wanted. And so Haggai calls the people back to God to begin rebuilding His temple. And so he warns them that things would not get better in their land until the fact that they turned themselves back to God. For 18 years, they didn't work on the temple. And God was not happy with them because He was the one who brought them out of exile and they just sort of forgot God. And so He wanted them to come back to the temple. There's a lot of irony in Scripture that we sometimes don't get. I had someone tell me recently that they didn't like reading the Bible, the beget section. That so-and-so begets somebody, so-and-so beget. They said it makes no sense to them. I said the reason it doesn't make any sense to them is that translators never told us what the names meant. When you very often see what the names meant, there's a lot of irony in it. And so Haggai literally means my holiday. And so Haggai was talking about more or less symbolically maybe the people had taken a holiday away from God. They'd taken a vacation away from doing what God had called them to do. And so now Haggai is calling them back for them to remember to put God first. There's three things that I think we can walk away this morning in looking at this very short book of the Bible. Is that one, that Haggai teaches that our choices matter in this life. We got that from our memory verse, and we'll come back to it at the end of the lesson. But the second thing is that obedience of God's people is part of how God works in this world. Now, we can't limit God in any way. He's the creator of all, right? But yet God works through this world through the obedience of His people. Now, God can make anything happen, and God can do anything, but God chooses very often to make His will happen by His people being obedient to Him in this world. And that's what Haggai is pointing out. If God had wanted a temple, He could have snapped His hand and made a temple. But God wanted His people to build a temple. And so God can do anything, but yet God chooses to show this world His power and His glory by His people being obedient to His will. That's really sort of interesting when you think about it. And the third thing we're going to look at this morning is knowing this should motivate us to be humble and to be active as God's people. Not in arrogance, not saying that we're it and you're not, but acknowledging that God is using us somehow to accomplish good in this world. We've looked at the Lord's Prayer not too often long ago. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. The kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So Jesus leads the believer to understanding that what we're doing here on earth should somehow reflect what God's already done in heaven. That somehow it should motivate and inform our ministry, how we handle the gospel, how we treat one another, how we reach out to the lost of this world, that somehow it needs to be reflecting what God has already done in heaven. So let's look at these 3 points in a little bit more detail this morning. In Haggai 1, 3 through 7, this is the beginning of the book. Then the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for yourselves to dwell in your panel houses, in this temple to lie in ruins? Now therefore, thus says the Lord God of hosts, consider your ways. You have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but do not have enough. You drink, but you are not filled. You clothe yourself, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages to put into a bag with holes. Thus says the Lord, consider your ways. Have you ever heard this thought or sentiment, the harder I work, the behinder I get? You ever heard that? You ever feel like, man, I'm working so hard, but it doesn't seem like getting any further ahead? You ever felt that way? That's what Haggai's saying. You people are hard workers, but you're not being satisfied in your labor. He said, consider your ways. And what he's saying is, he's not saying you're a bunch of sluggards. He's not saying you're a bunch of slothful people. But what he's saying is that you forgot to put God first. You're working and you're working and you're working and you're working and you're working. And as the lyrics of the old corny song, if you work your fingers to the bone, what do you get? Bony fingers. They were not being fulfilled because they forgot to keep God central in their life. They'd gotten really busy. I mean, they were busy people, but they weren't getting any further ahead. They were earning wages and putting them in a bag that had holes in it. They were preparing meals, but they really weren't fulfilled. I mean, their cup was full, but they weren't satisfied. You see, until we get the order right, our life is not in order. I guess in my life experiences, having worked in the treatment field for so many years now, and working with people who are struggling with alcohol and drug problems, they probably understand it better than anybody that their life is out of control. That if something doesn't stop, they're going to die. But what's ironic is that the only treatment that we really know is really, really effective is for them to put God priority in their life. That they turn their life and will over to God. That's what the whole 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Gamblers, that's what it's based upon. That I can't, God will, and I think I'll let Him. Basically, the summary of the first 3 steps. I can't, God can, and I'll let Him. The surrender. And so Haggai's saying that, listen, it's not that you're not trying to get ahead. You are trying, but you're doing it the wrong way. You left God out. And I'm inviting you to come back and re-engage in building the temple of God. Then all these efforts that you're doing in life will come to fruition. But when you leave God out, things fall apart. For some of us, tragedy has to happen. For some of us, things have to unravel in our life before we begin to say, oh, I do need God. I do need God. And it's a real tragic thing that sometimes calamity has to befall upon us before we turn back to God. And so that's what Haggai is calling his people to come back to God. Put Him back in priority, and then things will change for you. The harder these people worked for their own interests, the less they had. They'd forgotten what God had told the children of Israel as they were being led to the promised land. Remember back in Deuteronomy? Hear, O Israel, they'll be taken from slavery to freedom. And in freedom, eventually to the promised land. And this is what they were told. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. They were headed to the promised land, but they were said, this is priority 1. Don't forget God. You're out of slavery. You're headed to the land of milk and honey, but don't forget God. This is a qualifying condition over inheriting the land. Don't forget God. And this is no less important in 2019. And you haven't noticed the calendar is getting pretty thin. We're almost in 2020. Don't forget God. And don't wait till your life becomes a calamity. Don't wait till chaos happens. Don't wait till tragedy strikes. Remember God now. As a wise man said, remember God from your youth forward before the evil days come nigh and you'll say, I don't have any pleasure in it. So this is the challenge that we have. When God is no longer at the top of the list of our lives begin to unravel. You know what's interesting? The Bible tells the same story over and over and over again, but with different characters, different people, and different circumstances. It's the same thing. God blesses, people forget God. They begin to experience the consequences of forgetting God. It began Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. I mean, they had it made. All you can eat buffet. There was no Maytag washer and dryer in the Garden of Eden because they didn't have to worry about clothes. There was no saying last year's style didn't fit. They were always in style. There was no labor. There was no weeding the garden. There was no pain. There was no death. There was no suffering. There was no dying. There were no funeral homes in the Garden of Eden. Because those things didn't happen yet. But they forgot God. They allowed the enticement of this, a moment's temporary indulgence in something that was attractive, made them forget God. And we have all the bad things of the earth because of it. Joshua understood it. Joshua is an interesting character because his name probably, some approximation, if I said it in Hebrew, was something like Yeshua. They didn't do the hard J that we do. They did was more a Yah, Yeshua. And Yeshua means deliverer. Did you know the name Jesus is just a variation of the name Yeshua, deliverer? Jesus and Joshua simply the same name. But Joshua sort of got it. Joshua understood it. Moses had been his mentor. But Joshua sort of had it in spades over Moses in some respects. And so he makes this great summation before they inherit the land. If it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. What's he doing? He's going back to Deuteronomy and say, oh, remember when it says you love God with all you got? That's what I'm going to do as head of my household. We're going to serve God. This was a man being a man before God. He said, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be number one. He's going to be priority. He's going to be the top of the list. We will think of God before we think of others. Now, those of you who were here last Sunday night, I told you last Sunday night, this is not natural for us. I mean, I heard a song by Natalie Grant, and it really convicted me. Basically, her prayer is, Jesus, help me to want you more than anything. Help me to want the healer more than the healing. Help me want the Savior more than the saving. Help me want the deliverer more than delivering. Help me want the giver more than the giving. So we like the stuff that God gives us, but sometimes we like it more than we love God. It's our tendency. Our tendency. It's like the story you've probably heard and maybe read about the father who takes his family to a vacation on the beach or the ocean, and they're walking on the beach, and his little boy is so excited, and he's picking up all these broken shells, and the storms had washed some sand dollars, but they were all broken. And the son was so excited, he's picking these broken pieces of sand dollars, and he has them in his hand. He's waiting on the beach, and his hands are full of these broken pieces. And then as he's wading through this beach, the father sees it. It's a beautiful, perfect, pristine, unbroken sand dollar. Perfect circle, unbroken, unblemished. And his little boy's in a quandary. He's coming closer to him, and his hands are full of the broken pieces. And he looks from one hand to the other, and he doesn't know what he's doing. And finally, the father says, let go of the broken ones. He lets them go, and he can gently pick up the unbroken one. And how many times are we trying to pull our lives together, and we're holding on to the broken pieces, and God's saying, let go of the broken stuff. And remember me. Joshua says, I'm not going to forget God. And I'm not going to let the spiritual leader of my house, my family, forget God. See, Joshua's sort of an interesting leader. There's not much negative ever said about him. Moses had his shining moments, but Moses also had his low moments. David had his shining moments, but David also had his low moments. Solomon had his shining moments, but Solomon had a lot of low moments. But Joshua didn't. The second point that Haggai sort of brings out is obedience matters. Now, the obedience of God's people is one of the ways as God's working out His stuff in this world. It's not the only way, but it's one of the ways. And so God works with the obedience of His people. When we do His righteousness in the world, we confront the brokenness and restores creation. When we're acting and doing good in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, we're actually going back and saying, okay, this world's broken, let me fix my part of it. This is what was so wonderful about the Good Samaritan. He saw brokenness. He saw a beaten, naked man on the side of the road. And what did he do? He bound his wounds. He took care. He ran to the brokenness, not away from the brokenness. He was bringing kingdom reality into this world. He was leaning in when others ran away. And he partnered with God to see. And Jesus, this man knew what it meant to be a neighbor. He knew what it meant to do that. And so we see this. And so Joshua again, 22 to verse 5. He says, but take careful heed to the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God. It's still number one. To walk in His ways, do His righteousness, to keep His commandments, be obedient, to hold fast to Him, and to serve Him with all your heart and with all your soul. So he re-summarizes this Shema, that great saying that Israel had. He says, this is it. You want to be successful in life? You want things to be good for you? Don't forget God. Be righteous like He's righteous. Be obedient to Him. And give Him all you got. And it'll serve you well. It will serve you well. Obedience matters. I heard this line from a friend of mine that's a counselor. Then I heard this line in a movie. So I don't know where it originated, but it's true. Hurt people hurt people. When someone's hurting you, you need to step back and say this. Hurt people hurt people. Broken people break people. It's true. And sometimes when I'm sitting with someone in a counseling session and they're talking about how someone's hurting them, I said, yeah, hurt people hurt people. This person's broken too. Not that it gives them a pass for what they're doing or says what they're doing is not bad. It can be very, very bad. But hurt people hurt people. But in the same token, I think this could also be true. Blessed people bless people. Blessed people bless people. If you really know what you've been given, you cannot help but give. If you really appreciate the giver more than the giving, you've got to give. If you really appreciate the healing more than the heal, you've got to help others heal. If you really appreciate the Savior more than the saving, you've got to help save others. How many people have been inspired to go into medicine or to go into teaching by someone who helped them heal or helped them learn? So I want to do that when I grow up. You see, God is attempting to restore order in the world. And He says, I'm going to do it through broken vessels, my people. I mean, they're a rough lot. We studied last week how the prophet said God's going to take the broken and the lame and build His nation with the broken and the lame. The cripple, the limbless. God will do it. That's who God is. He takes the remnant. He takes the scattered. He takes the broken and says, okay, they'll be my people now. And so David says this in Psalm 68, 5-6 about the heart of God. A father of the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in His holy habitation. God sets the solitary in families. He brings out those who are bound into prosperity, but the rebellious dwell in a dry land. When people are God, are doing God's stuff, what Haggai's calling, when the people of God are concerned with His temple, they've got it good. But it's them taking care of the fathers. It's them taking care of the widow. It's them taking the loneliness and isolated people and making them families. And hey, come be a part of us. We're always open to new family members. But He says, if you don't do that, it's like He tells the people, and Haggai says, the harder you work, the less you have. You forget God. But if you're not doing these things, you live in a dry land. Now, I'll tell you what, folks, it's getting dry here. It's getting the kind of dry that makes me nervous because the ground cracks open. Anyone noticed? The ground's cracking open. It's like a tinderbox out there. It's scary living in a dry land. It doesn't produce. He says, now, if you don't do what God's called us to do, it's like that for you. It's the same thing Haggai's saying, don't forget God. And so Jesus was faced with this person that come up and says, hey, tell me what the top ones are. Tell me what's the most important commandment. What's the greatest? What's the numero uno? What's the one I need to focus in on? What's the one I need to sort of, put on the dashboard of my car, or my Camel or whatever, Which one should I remember? And Jesus says this. You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. He said, this is the first and great commandment. But I love, wait, whoa, don't go away. You should love your neighbor as yourself. And all the ink that's been spilled and all the writing that's been done, and all the scrolls in the world can be summarized in those two things. Love God, love others. And you really, really love God, you really, really love others. When you really, really feel blessed by God, you really, really learn how to bless others. Because this is the summary of everything. And so we look at the third point. Haggai says, basically, be humble and do good. In our fellowship, we got a bad reputation for a good many years, and we contributed to that. And some of us heard it, oh, you Church of Christ, you think you're the only ones going to heaven. Ever heard that? I remember Brother Charles Lemons, he always had a wise way of saying things. He would follow that up with, most of us aren't going to make it either. So that was his concern. I remember the bad Church of Christ slam about the guy who died going to heaven, and goes to heaven, there's all these different rooms, And so he goes to one room, and St. Peter says, look in here, and all these people, are praising God and, having a really, great worship experience. And, and the guy says, wow, that's pretty impressive. And he says, take him to another room, and all these people, are having a big meal and, sort of joining a big fellowship like that. And he said, wow, that's pretty impressive. He goes to another room, all these people are just sitting really quiet in the auditorium facing forward. And he goes, what? Come out. And St. Peter said, what's the deal? He said, oh, the Church of Christ, I think they're the only ones up here. Bad joke, but it was a point of conviction for some of us, right? In Haggai's day, the temple was a physical place. But in our times, it's a spiritual one. The temple that Haggai was talking about, it's in ruins today. It's destroyed. It's the Temple Mount. The Muslims have built a big mosque on top of it. Basically, the mosque is on one side. The Dome of Rock's on the other. There's that old top building. It's in ruins. And it was prophesied to be in ruins. It's not a shock. God says, I'm going to change things. And so the temple today is not a physical place. It's a spiritual one. The temple today is you. Individually, collectively, we make up the temple of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16, Paul says, do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? So all the work that he talked about them needing to do in the temple, he says today you need to do in yourself. The neglect that they made to building the temple of God, we sometimes neglect ourselves spiritually today. In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, again with the same thing, or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have from God, and you're not your own, for you are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and your spirit, which are God's. God says, I'm not going to longer be linked to one physical location. I'm not. I'm going to dwell within people. My spirit will be carried about upon the earth by my people being obedient to me. Haggai's call was get back to work. The holiday from God was over. The temple must be rebuilt. It's the same thing today. We don't have a physical place to look at. I remember, made this comment recently, my father never would call the church building the church. We didn't go to church. We went to the church house. It was how it was referenced. That building was not the church. The people were the church. That was simply the house where the church met. But we sort of, let's go to church. That's not really true. We don't. We go to the church building, but the church is the people. And so while Haggai calls for a physical restoration of God's people, I think the call today is for spiritual restoration of God's people. We each individually do our work on the temple. We re-examine our lives and say, where is God really in my life? Is God really number one? Or does God come after everything else has been done? Where I've got everything else. If nothing else better comes up, we'll go to church Sunday. If there's not a bigger priority, we'll go to Wednesday night Bible class. If something else better doesn't happen, then we'll do. That's taking a holiday from God. And so when we see our priorities are more important than God's, we may seem for everything we work for is coming to nothing. There's a world full of blessed people who don't feel blessed because they're not fulfilled. We see people who reach the zenith of careers. They're popular. They got the money. They got the notoriety, and they die with a needle on their arm. Or they drink themselves to death. Or they take their own life. You see, it's easy to have those things and still not feel like you have anything. And so we have to be careful. God's up to something. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 20 through 22 says, Paul giving us a very deep theology here. Having been built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Jesus himself being a chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building being fit together grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you are also being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. You don't have to have a building for God to exist. You are the building. Brick by brick, piece by piece, we make up the temple of God. And what we each must individually decide is, am I really invested in the temple of God? Or have I been putting my own stuff first? When I was preparing for the lesson, I remember how faddish things can be. How many remember when people just had to have paneling in every room of the house? Remember? Paneling was the end thing. Everybody wanted paneling. So they went over their sheetrock walls and put paneling up. Remember how everyone the thing to have was wall-to-wall carpet. Okay? And so we covered our hardwood floors with wall-to-wall carpet. And now what's this thing? Who wants carpet? Who wants paneling? I mean, we're fickle people. And God says, listen, I'm always the same. I'm not fickle. You love me. You show your love of me by how you treat other people. And I'm really wanting to build a temple that's spectacular. The sad thing was, in Haggai's day, when they finished the temple, you know what happened? When they laid the foundation down? You know what happened? The young people who couldn't remember the old temple, they rejoiced. Hey, we got a temple started. Yay, we're going to have a great temple. You know what the people who could remember the temple did? They sat down and wept because they could tell by the foundation it was not going to be like the temple that Solomon built. They wept. Sometimes we long for the day that people had a passion and love for the Lord. Now, that was really the most important thing that families did together. That was the most important thing that we could do with our time. We long for the day. And sometimes we approximate, people get really happy, but some of us like, it used to be different. It used to be different. There was a priority in which you put God first. I think that sometimes we've been sort of led into that Haggai, our holiday. And so Haggai was to speak to his people is to remember the Lord. Put him first. The church is not the things that surround us, but the people that surround us. We collectively make up the place of the Spirit of God to dwell. The choices that we make do make a difference as to the scale and quality of that dwelling. If we each individually make the choice to put God first, it affects how big we grow and how we grow, physically, spiritually, relationally. So this was his words in Haggai chapter 1, verse 5. Give careful thought to your ways. New King James says, consider your ways. And the appeal for him saying in that memory verse, should be a short memory verse to remember this week, is that think about what you're doing. And where is God in relationship to this? We're here this morning if we can assist you in some way. Brother Ronnie's chosen a song to give us a space and time to respond if you're so inclined. And we're here in any way that you need us this morning. And we're going to give this space and time to do this. Brother Ron, would you listen to that song?